So I am here today with George Dawes Green. So excited. He's the founder of the Moth, a beloved global storytelling movement, I believe. That's what I would call it. And he's also an incredible novelist. He's had 2 novels go to film. And so Caveman's Valentine, starring Samuel L. Jackson, and The Juror with Demi Moore. And then his 3rd novel, which is fantastic, I've just started reading, Kingdoms of Savannah. So we are in Savannah right now at the Ann in the library. So I want to give a nice shout out to the Ann as well, beautiful room. He also is currently co-director and producer of a documentary, Edgar and Helen, which follows the story of a brother and sister who grew up in Savannah. So he is currently filming in Savannah back and forth. And thrilled to have you here, George.
It's great to be here.
So for anyone who doesn't know, is not familiar with the Moth or its origin story, could you share a little bit about how that started and why and where?
Well, I was in New York back in '97, and people were telling great stories in New York, but not at cocktail parties, and not, the thing was, you were at a cocktail party and you got interrupted after 15 seconds. There were always these interruption vultures.
Okay.
And I had grown up, mostly in Georgia, mostly around Brunswick and in Savannah. And I just thought, there are great stories in New York. If we only had a venue where people could tell stories. And it really didn't exist at the time. There was nobody ever thought of, let's just bring the sort of true stories that you would tell in a kitchen. Let's bring them onto a stage. And so we did it. And it immediately turned out to be something that everybody wanted to go to. It was, it's interesting to think that there's sort of been a market for that for thousands of years that nobody tapped into.
Yeah. And it started in your living room, right?
It started in my living room.
That's amazing.
And actually, it wasn't a very good show, the first show. First show was terrible.
Were you in the show?
No, I wasn't a storyteller. But it was just, people went on too long. People really didn't know how to tell a story. And they thought, there has to be some kind of a moral, or there has to be some. And the stories felt phony. But right after it was over, people still wanted, they wanted to come back. And so I thought, I know we can do this.
So did you set up guidelines then after that? Or did you set a time limit?
Yeah,
or what did you do?
Yeah, then we set up a time limit. I thought, okay, bring in a timekeeper, bring in a violinist.
Did you?
Yeah, that was the most important thing.
I love that.
And then also just to begin to understand what a great story was. And then we just began to find great storytellers. So Frank McCourt, who wrote Angela's Ashes, was one of our first just completely brilliant storytellers.
I did not know that.
And the thing that I kind of learned from him is that the storytellers that we first had were all people who were sort of pushing out. They were pushing their story out. And Frank McCourt, he was telling a story about being a teacher in New York. And I won't try to do his brogue, but he sort of told the story like this, that I was a teacher in New York after I came here from Ireland, and the students were difficult at best, and just this quietness. And everybody in the room
was drawn in.
You saw everybody leaning in, and I felt as though this was a great lesson in how to be a raconteur. And so there were all sorts of those early lessons. A great performer, Jonathan Ames, is also a great writer. He told a story that was sort of a body thing about how he had discovered sexuality when he was 12 years old. But it was a very embarrassing story, and I'm not going to repeat it here for your audience. But the idea was that he told the story with a willingness to expose his vulnerabilities. And that we realized quickly was the key to the Moth, that you had to come in and present your vulnerabilities, and then people would respond. If you came in and said, I'm really good at this or that, then the audience would pull back.
Right.
But if you came in and said, no, I'm a clown, and I'm just trying to struggle my way through life, and I don't know what I'm doing,
Mm-hmm.
then the audience would be completely on your side.
Because they see themselves in that?
Because the stories are all the
Right.
stories, will play out in your own brain as
Right.
you're listening.
Mm-hmm.
And that experience of being in a room with one storyteller and an audience
Mm-hmm.
is electric.
It is electric.
Yeah. And so that it just started and it grew and grew and grew and grew. And now we have, I think last year we had 300 million downloads of our podcast. And we're on radio stations all around the world.
Right.
And there's a Moth or a Moth clone in every major capital of the world now. So
it's mind-blowing.
It
I mean, it really is mind-blowing.
Kind of a movement.
So with that said, since the root of it is so authentic and being vulnerable and being so open, and that is what makes it so popular. How do you think that stays intact as it scales and moves across the world, different cultures, different countries? So how does that? Because clearly it stayed intact or wouldn't be as popular as it is.
Well, I wouldn't say that it stays intact. It's always challenged. It's always threatened. People will, what happens is there's always a tendency to say, oh, well, here's a formula. This is working. And so we'll just keep doing this formula. But what happens then is people are very aware when the Moth begins to feel like a formula. And then we do our best to explode it, and to bring in different kinds of storytellers. It's just a whole different evening. So, but it's always a matter of, it's always evolving. It has to be.
Right.
And we can never have the sense of, well, here's an art form where we can tell raconteurs how to tell a story.
Right.
Every now and then, that's sort of what people at the Moth think is that, sometimes we think, oh, well, we can teach how to tell a story. Well, we can give suggestions, but honestly, storytelling it's constantly changing. And it should. It's an art form.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously influenced as well from the cultures and the countries where all of this is taking place.
Yeah.
Completely. Vastly different.
Whenever I go to a different Moth in a different city, I find a different kind of story. And we have the thing called the Moth Slams, which are sort of our amateur night where everybody can, you put your name in a hat, and if you're chosen, then you stand up and tell a 5-minute story. And we have been having Moth Slams since 1998 in New York, and they just, they're always full. Actually, they're all over. I think we have 32 cities now where we have regular Moth Slams in the U.S., and then we have them, all over the world. But what's so amazing is how the Moth Slam feel changes constantly. So, for example, in the first few years of doing the Moth Slams, we couldn't get women to tell stories.
Really?
Occasionally they would tell a story. But the stories felt like, mostly we were getting a lot of bro stories then. I got so drunk on Saturday night, and here's the story. There's always a big crowd, a very raucous crowd. And that slowly began to change as we got better and better raconteurs sort of competing. But women wouldn't do it. And if they did do it, their stories didn't seem to be great. And then there was one or two women who, after about 6 or 7 years of that, one or two women who started telling stories that weren't anything like the bro stories. And then more and more
Empowered
women
others.
began to come up, and the stories completely changed and grew. And now the majority of Moth stories are told by women.
And are there less bro stories in response?
Well, the bros, actually, the bro stories only lasted for a couple of years, and they faded out. Thank God. I'm so tired of that. I was so drunk, man. Dude,
That is really.
I was wasted.
How many times can we talk about that? So, in all of these stories that you have heard and seen across cultures and countries, what human themes are most, universal that you see?
Well, again, I go back to that vulnerability. When, I think that the story that you're trying to tell is about your own vulnerability in the world. I find people would sort of imagine that your stories would be about survival episodes. And some of them are, but most stories are about family. Most stories are about my sister wanted to kill me, and whatever. It's about mother or sister. A lot of stories about finding one's identity. I think that's been a big thing. And lately, the Moth slams in New York are mostly stories told by immigrants. So they're just...
That's interesting.
Yeah,
They've joined.
They're just so many immigrants who want to tell their particular story of, they're from India, and this is what it's like. Incredible young woman a few weeks ago was telling a story about she's Russian and growing up in Brooklyn, and just sort of she and her gang being shuffled from one like Lowe's. They used to hang out at Lowe's, but the Lowe's people always watching them to see what they were going to steal. And she said, we didn't steal all that much, but
I was about to say, you probably get confessions up there, I'm sure, quite a bit.
But it was really great to just hear these stories of this neighborhood, this world within New York. There are so many.
So many.
Yeah.
I know a lot of leaders tend to think that storytelling is a soft skill. I do think that's changing, because I think that people are understanding there's a lot more to it. What do you think leaders or people might misunderstand about story and how it can transform culture when it's told well?
I think that this is, it's essential to any leader to understand the story of whatever institution you're trying to advance. Where does it come from? What is your narrative? Because that's how people are going to get interested. When you talk about your company or your enterprise of any kind, and you tell it from this sort of emotional point of, well, here was a problem. Here was a decision that we had to make early on, because all stories are about decisions. If you try to tell a story that's about what happened, it will fail.
It's not compelling.
It's not compelling. But if you just zero in the very beginning on what were the decisions that were crucial, and then tell the story from that angle, then it is always compelling. And so many folks don't know how to tell that. They sort of think, well, this is a series of events, but a great story is always a series of decisions. And if you begin to think about this narrative, that's the way that you get your company out into the world. I mean, you think about the difference, for example, of what Apple and Steve Jobs, who knew what his story was, compare that to Bill Gates's Microsoft, which there was a sort of a nice story. Bill Gates is going to give away all of his money.
Not at all the same romance with the company.
And the essence to most stories is a failure. That almost all, particularly in America, great American stories are about failures. All of our presidents always would focus in their campaigns on some failure that they overcame.
Yes.
And it's just, it's gone on and on and on that way. And people don't quite realize how important it is to begin a story with a failure. Because again, that's vulnerability.
Yeah.
When you begin to think that way, then you can find the way into people's hearts.
Mhm.
I was recently talking to the folks who make Clorox, and they have the greatest story about this Scotswoman who was married to a chemical engineer who had come home one day and say, well, we have all this sort of chemical bleach that we don't know what to do with. But he said, but you remember that we took it and experimented and it actually gets clothes white. And she was the one who then said, well, why don't you do this, make all these little bottles and we'll just give them away. And tell women that if you add this to your laundry, that your whites will get white. And he went to the bleach company and they said, that is the last thing we're going to do. We don't have money to experiment with your little bottles, whatever you're dealing with here. But she finally got them to do this. She, with her force of will, and then a market developed. And then women came back to the stores and they said, well, we want to actually, can we buy this? And she was the one who said, no, tell them they can't buy it. We're just gonna give it away. We're good because we have so much. Right. And all over California, they just gave away Clorox and Clorox and Clorox until they built an entire market. And then they finally said, okay, now we're gonna charge you for it. But, once you sort of talk to people about, get that story out, because that's a way to
connect. And you see it on the Moth stages everywhere. Yeah. When your novels went to film,
yes,
you have to let go.
Yes.
So creatively and personally, what did that look like for you? How did that feel for you to let go of those and release them into Hollywood's hands? And
yeah, I mean, it's really tough. Because you have a vision, and then you don't want to lose that vision. On the other hand, there's the great excitement and the thrill of, I remember once for Caveman's Valentine, heading up to way up in Harlem, I had a scene out on Ward's Island. There's a little sort of pedestrian bridge, and I thought, well, let's put when I originally conceived of that, I thought, well, I'll put a playground on the other side of this bridge, and then a murder that happens in this playground. And so for the movie, there wasn't a playground on Ward's Island, so they had to build the playground. And then I drove up in a taxi cab, and I couldn't get to the site because the traffic was all stopped. And then I realized the traffic is stopped because of these Hollywood lights that are lighting up Ward's Island. And there, as I looked across to Ward's Island, there was a little playground, which had come out of my nightmare, which was incredibly exciting. Yeah. I mean, how thrilling and weird is that? Yeah. So that is, writing books is an extremely lonely and difficult process, right. But now and then you have rewards.
And were you very involved in the process?
I was, to some extent, but it takes its own life, and you do have to just let it go. It's not yours anymore, and you enjoy it as much as you can. But it's always true that you don't, your vision is never exactly matched.
Well, do you? I was speaking to another author about this. Do you feel like you embody the book, or does the book for a novel that you write sort of have its own identity and you separate as it goes out into the world?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think at first you feel very much like this is your little dream, and then eventually it becomes, another dream. They're working on making Kingdoms of Savannah into a TV series.
I did not know that.
And I'm not writing the script, so when I see the scripts, they're, it's very different from what I conceived of. Right. There's still the there's still the germ and the essential nature. But I'm very yeah, I'm very trusting. You know, they have a vision,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm glad they do. I want them to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I personally think too that I'm very much like that as well, and much like the Moth has evolved, so do all of our stories that we write. I think.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and I think it's fascinating the many iterations that can stem from, and I'm always fascinated by something created out of nothing, literally
Right.
just a blank page.
Yeah.
And then all of these things that can come out of it, and things that you can't even imagine, or that's been my case. And you probably didn't envision that become your first book becoming a film, did you? Or did you? Maybe you did.
I might have entertained the idea that, this would be a great movie. But
Well, it came to fruition, so maybe you willed it.
I didn't know. I didn't think so. No, I honestly didn't think it would turn. I just wanted to sell it as a book. But
yeah. No, that's exciting.
Yeah.
And so, if you will talk a little bit about the documentary that you're working on, I'd love to know what drew you to the project, and how does returning to a specific place and its layered memory shape the storytelling itself?
Yeah. So this story, Helen and Edgar, is by our great Moth raconteur.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I think. I mean, I don't want to say the greatest, but he's a brilliant and riveting raconteur who I came down to Savannah in probably 1999 with Edgar, and we sort of hung around Savannah together, and he began to tell me stories about growing up in Savannah with his insane mother and his lovely sister Helen. And then those were developed into Moth stories, which became big hits. And then about 10 years ago, we gathered them together into a show that we put on at the Public Theater in New York. It was a big hit. It was just Edgar's one-man show where he just tells the story of Savannah and his escape from mother and the escape from Savannah. And it's just, it was just lovely. And then he took it sort of on tour around the world. We got fabulous reviews for this show. Ben Brantley in the Times just gave it a rave, and the New Yorker gave it a rave. And then I kept telling Edgar, I kept saying, one day we'll make it into a movie. But I never really thought I had time. And then one day I thought, boy, we better get to this. So that's what we're doing. And it really isn't a documentary. It's really a feature in that we're really recreating his childhood with actors. And Edgar and his sister Helen appear in the movie, but just sort of on the periphery of the movie as they're telling stories. But it really is about this bizarre Savannah childhood.
It is a bizarre, yes. Yeah, so I went to the event, when was that? A few months ago.
Yeah.
And it was a riveting story. And it's so, I'm from Savannah, and, I was not aware of that story. It was pretty mind-blowing. So
yeah, it's very haunting.
It is very haunting.
Creepy, but also it's just sort of amazing. These two amazing children, brother and sister, and it really is just a story of a brother and sister who are so close that they develop a secret language that allows them to talk to each other
and survive
in an impossible situation.
Wild story. And so where are you now with this? You're still filming?
We've shot about 85% of the movie, and we're coming down to shoot another week, and we'll finish the movie by the end of April, and then
exciting.
We're in post, and we should have something to show you all by June.
That's exciting.
And
that's exciting. And are you okay sharing the new project that you told me about?
Sure.
I'd love to. So you're doing a play, which I just learned about, which is amazing. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
So I wrote a play about Thomas Paine, one of our founding fathers, the guy who basically invented the American Revolution. and who then went over and invented the French Revolution. Thomas Paine. And when he was very old, he was with the woman that he had always loved, Marguerite Bonneville, one room in Greenwich Village in a boarding house. And he was broke and an outcast because he stood up for abolition and for women's rights and the women's right to vote. And all of that was considered unacceptable in those days.
Yes.
So when Thomas Paine went out on the street, kids would throw rocks at him. And so I'm just taking one day in his life. And the play is called Thomas and Marguerite. And it's about Marguerite as much as it is about Thomas. And it's a kind of a surreal vision. And Brian Cox and his wife, Nicole Ansari, are going to do a reading of it in London in 2 weeks.
Very exciting.
So that's
Very exciting.
A lot of rewriting I have to do. And then they're coming to New York to do a reading in New York in July. And then we hope to mount a full production sometime this winter. That's
very exciting. You have a lot going on.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you shared that. That's amazing. So in Kingdoms of Savannah, place really shapes identity in profound ways. And I love reading it because, as I mentioned, I just started it. And I know I obviously don't know the actual characters, but I know these people, the way that they speak, when you were describing places they were, and it's so rich. It's such amazing, rich, vibrant language and characters. So how do you think that environment, whether it's a city or an organization or a culture, shape the stories that people believe about themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's completely true that there are certain cities around the world that really create stories and create community. And, when you think about Savannah history, there's so much darkness in our history and so much evil, honestly. But then the great part of the history the great figure is Oglethorpe, who really wasn't evil. He was just a good man who built this incredible city. The design of the city, if we kept to his design, we would have, one of the great cities. I think we have one of the great cities of the world anyway. But it is true that what happened in the 1930s is they began to bring in zoning regulations that took the businesses out of Savannah and put them down south of Durand, which sort of split the city up. And then what happened is the city began to empty out. The downtown of Savannah, the population was 5 times what it is now, back in the 40s and 50s. So it was a really vibrant place. And then, eventually people just began to buy houses as investments, and lawyers from Atlanta who don't live here. And that has drained a lot of the character, at least from the area of the downtown, but still all around the downtown. You have a really vibrant, living city. And a city needs this sense of community. And there are so many cities now that are, particularly in America, that just don't have that. So what I celebrate about Savannah is that, this is a place where you can walk from one end of Savannah to the other in afternoon. And some of the characters do that. And it's a contemporary thriller, but I really get into the sense of place.
Yes.
Because Savannah still has the opportunity to be, the great, a foundry of great creative inspiration because of this. It's just a great place for community. And I think SCAD has contributed a lot to the revival of Savannah.
Absolutely.
But there's a long, long way to go. But I still, I absolutely love Savannah. And I guess I was inspired in writing the Kingdoms of Savannah. What that means is the kingdoms is the little communities that Savannah has that are so separate from each other. there's the idea of, the gay community that might, and that's its own sort of cloistered community within Savannah. There's there's all the rich folks at the landings. There's the Black community. There are all of these different kingdoms, and in my book, they're all sort of brought together in this, in a around a central mystery that also goes way back into Savannah history. But I think the reason that I started the Moth was that I believe that actual physical communities in this age of the internet and AI are essential. We have to be able to actually get together and interact with each other. And we can do that around storytelling.
You answered my very next question. Why is it so important in this digital, fast-paced world to have live storytelling events? So
yeah, it's that when a lot of people who have never been to a story event don't realize when you go to a really great one, there's an energy in the room that seems to be something primal. It's something in the human DNA, this business of listening to stories. Because it is Homo sapiens that develops storytelling. The other species in our genus don't, as far as we know, they didn't have much storytelling. They just didn't have the brain to have it. And most of our brain is consumed with family and stories about family. And that's completely understandable from the point of view of survival, that it's the tribes that were able to keep track of broader and broader families that were able to be bigger and bigger tribes and therefore more powerful. And so Homo sapiens tribes got to be 600 and 700 people, and sometimes because of how stories bring us together, they could even begin to have thousands of people in a single tribe, which made them so much more powerful than the other species that were only able to have 60 or 80 members. But there's something about the storytelling that it's just this elemental experience. And when a storyteller is bringing a story out of his own, not memorized, just something that he's cooking up in his head, and we respond as though we are that storyteller. And then you get this back and forth. And those are beautiful moments, but they're also so powerful for building community. So, and I think that is going to be more and more necessary in the age of AI. People want more and more physical contact with people.
Yeah, and I think that they do. I feel that. Yeah, I noticed that.
So the Moth is just, is continuing to grow, which, movies aren't.
Right. So I guess my final question really is, after decades of building spaces for people to gather and tell stories, what gives you hope right now?
Well, I think that art and the love of humanity and the love of being together and the love of building communities, I think it's very, very much alive. I see it. I see it all over the world, wherever I travel. Whenever I go to a new Moth, if it's in, Australia or Korea or in, Seattle or Louisville, Kentucky, they're all, there's a sense of individual communities telling their own special kind of story. And I think that spirit is very much alive. The human spirit, I think it's incredibly challenged by AI. Nobody knows what's going to happen in 1 year or 3 years. It's clearly the biggest challenge that humanity has ever faced. Are we going to be able to survive AI? But I think we'll do it through physical connection and through telling each other stories.
Last thing is it's amazing when I'm hearing you talk about Korea and Australia and Louisville, Kentucky. Like, what does it feel like for you to have this little tiny seed that started in your living room magnify.
I know.
I mean, it's
very
incredible.
It is very strange.
Yes.
I
I mean, do you feel like a threat? Because a threat of you, to an extent, is extended into all of these events all over the world.
Yes, and it really comes from here. It comes from Savannah. It comes from my when I was 11. We had moved. We'd been sort of moving around the north, and Mother wanted to come back to her home, and so we came back to Brunswick. But we would go up to Savannah every weekend, and there we would sit and share stories. And so that's really where I got sort of indoctrinated into this idea of how powerful storytelling is. I think it was the Atlanta Journal-Constitution that said that the Moth is the first global movement to come out of Southeast Georgia since the Girl Scouts. So,
that's an incredible accolade.
so I like that. But my favorite of all those accolades was once the Dublin Times was doing an interview with me when the Moth first started in Dublin. And then the guy wrote up the interview, and he was very, very generous. And at the end, he said, "Thank you, Mr. Green, for bringing storytelling to Ireland."
Wow.
Which was a little bit of what they call taking the piss, but it was also fun.
And so you came from generations of storytellers.
I mean, I think we all have.
We all have,
right? Yeah.
Even if they don't necessarily frame themselves that way.
Yeah. My great aunt would just tell me the most. And what I loved about her stories, and this is something that's very crucial about stories, there are a lot of people who try to tell stories or they start groups, and the stories are very sweet and loving, but that's not what storytelling is. Storytelling is mostly about bitterness. And it's not all about bitterness, and there's always a sense of redemption. But there needs to be bitterness in a story, and there needs to be wit, and we need to understand this is a really difficult chore that we've been given to be human beings. And so stories have to be about challenge, and they have to be a dismantling of the rules that were given. And that's what my great aunt used to do when we would go up here to Savannah, and all of my mother and our second cousins would all gather to praise great grandmother, Big Inez, she was called, who had passed some years before. And I can remember when I was 7 years old coming out with Aunt Alice to the car because she wanted to smoke a cigarette. And then she said, "I hate it, Big Inez." And then proceeded to tell me the truth about Big Inez. And that seemed to me to be, that was sort of like the essence of romance and beauty. So that I hope that we've retained in the Moth, that we have the power to undercut, these ideas of, because we believe that, oh yes, we'll bring people together, but it's always really about telling the truth.
I can't think of a better place to end the interview. That was so, thank you. This was wonderful. I mean, I could talk to you for 5 more hours, but anyway, this was really interesting. Thank you.
That's
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much.
much. Thank you.